All right, guys, here we are, episode 14 of the Connect the Dots NYC podcast. Can you believe it? Feels like we're just getting started, but we've also already met some incredible changemakers along the way. I'm so glad you're joining me today because today's episode is going to be both inspiring and eye opening. We're talking to someone who has spent years rethinking how communities respond to homelessness, and trust me, you'll want to hear this. So, without further ado, thank you for joining me today, and let's get started. Kevin F. Adler is a social entrepreneur, author, and speaker who has become one of the most respected voices in reimagining solutions to homelessness. He is the founder of Miracle Messages, a nonprofit that reconnects people experiencing homelessness with their loved ones and helps rebuild social support networks through innovative programs like family reunification, phone buddy initiatives, and guaranteed income pilots. Over the years, Kevin has built a reputation for combining rigorous research, human centered design, and a deep commitment to dignity and connection in addressing homelessness. His work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, PBS, and other major news outlets. He has shared his insights on stages, including TED, inspiring communities and leaders to think differently about systemic challenges. Kevin is also the author of When We Walk By, Forgotten Humanity, Broken Systems, and the Role We Can Each Play at Ending Homelessness in America, a book that challenges societal assumptions and invites readers to consider how each of us can play a role in creating real, lasting change. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks. Sounds like a cool guy you described. I hope to meet him someday.
Well, I want to start with your background and the inspiration that you had when getting into this homeless advocacy work. And so, in When We Walk By, you mentioned how you never learned the word stranger. How has that shaped the way you approach homelessness and human connection?
So I didn't know anything about homelessness when I started this journey. I just had an uncle who was homeless for 30 years. Was guest of honor at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner table, favorite member of my extended family. After he was found deceased at the age of 50, had passed away, I started just thinking, gosh, everyone I'm walking by, that's someone's son or daughter, that's some kid's beloved uncle or aunt. So my journey really begins with a connection to my uncle and his just the relationship I had with him, inspiring me to step out of my comfort zone and starting to go up to people experiencing homelessness who are visibly homeless and saying, "Hi, how are you? What's your name? I'm Kevin," and building a not a relationship, but just interacting. And yeah, through that experience back in 2013, 2014, I heard an individual in one of those conversations say, I never realized I was homeless when I lost my housing, only when I lost my family and friends. So that hit me like a lightning bolt. Uh, Very painful to hear this what I now call relational poverty aspect of homelessness that I hadn't thought much about, but it made sense to me. So, but you asked about never learning the word stranger. A lot of that comes from my mom. She was a older adult school exercise instructor. Always worked with folks who were kind of at the margins of society in nursing homes, and she just had this mantra of life that people are people, and just whether you have a lot of wealth or very little, or high level of education or low, or lots of family or all alone, we should treat people with respect and dignity and that they matter. They're valuable. And so I've coming from a small town and having a small family and that set of values, and then my faith, informed my view of people to try to imagine people as kin, as family members and friends.
And before writing the book, you founded Miracle Messages. What inspired you to start the organization, and how did it begin to shape your thinking about relational poverty?
Well, after hearing people on the streets articulate this early formation of what I call, relational poverty, someone saying, "I never realized I was homeless when I lost my housing, only when I lost my family and friends." Well, if you heard someone say that, what would you do? Kind of sat there and thought about it. I said, well, maybe I can just walk up to people experiencing homelessness and ask them, "Do you have any family or friends you want to reconnect to?" And it just happened that the first person I met was a man named Jeffrey, and he said he hadn't seen his family in about 22 years. Sat down with him and asked his last name and hometown and, date of birth, and just some basic information. And then I asked if he'd like to, record a video to his family. So he recorded a video, his dad, his niece, his nephew, his sister. So I go home and go on social media and get on Facebook and did a search and found a group connected to Jeffrey's hometown. I posted the video there with a short note. Within an hour, the video had gone viral. Made the local news that night as the leading story. And classmates started commenting, "Hey, I went to high school with Jeffrey. I work in a congressman's office. Does he need health care? I work at the construction site. Does he need a job?" And in the first 20 minutes of the post, his sister got tagged. We got on the phone the next day and she told me that Jeffrey had been a missing person for 12 years. So that was the first of what became Miracle Messages, where we are a nonprofit that is dedicated to helping people experiencing homelessness like Jeffrey record messages. Doesn't have to be video, could be a paper form, an online form. We have a hotline, 1-800-MISS-YOU is our hotline number. And when a message comes in, we have a network of volunteer digital detectives. These are people who make phone calls and write letters, volunteers, everyday people dedicating some of their time to help people who are unhoused who they may never meet in person, but they're still trying to help them reconnect. So we've now at Miracle Messages, we've reunited about 1,100 families, many of whom have been disconnected for years, if not decades. And then for folks where family may be not a viable option, or they're already connected, or there's trauma, there's reasons not to reconnect. We launched a phone buddy program where we match unhoused neighbors with volunteers for weekly phone calls and text messages. And then from that program, that led us to create what turned out to be one of the first basic income pilots for unhoused folks in the country. We had volunteers who said, "Hey, you've asked me to be friends with this person. Now we're friends and I trust them. I care about them. Hard to turn a blind eye on my friend if they're not getting food on the table tonight." So, yeah, now we do direct cash transfers in addition to the reunion work and the phone buddy work. And undergirding all of it is this embrace of the role of narrative change. The book is part of that. Happy to share more in a minute about that. But also, we're working, online videos, developing a workbook. We're developing more of a system of chapters where people in their own communities, college students, can create the Miracle Messages chapter to offer our services and also just get to know and break bread with their unhoused neighbors. So, yeah, it's been a real joy to lead the organization for about 10 years. And then 2 years ago, to step aside and welcome our new CEO and continue to support her in the organization as a board chair and a strategic advisor and as the founder.
And you talked during the answer about narrative change and how the book has definitely played a role in that. Actually, after figuring out that I was gonna have the opportunity to interview you, I actually ended up getting the book, and it's been a wonderful read so far. I haven't had the chance to finish it yet, but I do want to focus on it because it's not every day that we see, you know, this sort of work in the form of literature, something that we can read. A lot more of what's, I guess, popular knowledge about homeless advocacy is like you'll see interviews on TV screens, or you'll see nonprofits coming up. But you wrote a book, and the title of the book starts with "When We Walk By," and it's such a striking phrase. And I want to ask you, what inspired it, and what do you hope readers take away from it?
Mm. Oh, great question. We need new Walter Cronkite in the world. Keep it up. It's a terrific question. Well, what I tell you is, when we walk by, so at just like a thematic phrase, have a lexicon level. I'm a big believer in what's called natural pathways, desire pathways. So Imagine, you're at a park and there's like sidewalk, but then there's a footpath connecting point A and point B that people just naturally form. Um, and I'm fascinated by natural pathways, desire pathways. So for me, it was very important to come up with a phrase that kind of already is in the discourse. Maybe it's not super common, but it's like, okay, when we walk by, it's like when I walk by that person. And what's been actually really interesting is I set up a Google alert for when we walk by just to see if there's any, media coverage of the book and just be aware of conversations. And I get hits on that occasionally of work that has nothing to do with my book, but still relates to the issue of homelessness. Right. And it's people in their own way describing, and they're probably not even familiar with the book, which yeah, it's fine. So yeah, at just like a really high level, I think one of the problems on the issue of homelessness is it's feels inaccessible. It's like, what can I do? How can I get involved? It's insurmountable. There's nothing we can do to make a difference. It's important even from the very beginning to like try to meet people where they're at, but not leave them there. And the title reflects that. And maybe one other element on the title that just to reflect on. So the title is When We Walk By, not If We Walk. Inevitably, you're going to walk by. Inevitably. And the point isn't to like, the book is not meant to make people feel bad or guilty for that. And hopefully that was been your experience in the book. Like that was the last thing I wanted to do. There's enough guilt and shame in the world, let alone on the issue of homelessness. Like we don't need people feeling like they're not smart enough or good enough or saying the right words. Like we don't need that. It's not helpful. What we need is taking some time to say, well, gosh, when we walk by, what's happening? What's that dynamic look like? Did I walk by because I'm afraid? Because the person made me uncomfortable? Maybe I just have to go to a meeting or pick up my kid from school. And in that case, am I intentionally finding opportunities to not walk by, to then go closer? Or maybe I just, because of my experiences or my identity or how I am perceived in the world, I don't feel safe going up to a person who's on the streets. Well, makes sense. Maybe is there a way to visit a shelter, a soup kitchen, volunteer with a group like Miracle Messages, get matched with a phone buddy? The point is, again, meeting people where they're at, not leaving them there. What is going on? Where is it deviating from maybe our values and how we want to show up, how we'd want to raise our kids to see a world where, in the richest nation on earth, we don't have people living and dying without shelter. That should just not exist. And then what role can I play individually, if not in helping, solve homelessness or help my unhoused neighbors, at least understand it um, as the community matter it is, as the policy matter it is, and not just default to it being like a criminal matter and saying, oh, it's individual choice, it's deservedness, it's people, have mental health issues and drugs and alcohol. Well, there's people who have mental health issues, drugs and alcohol issues who are housed. Why is it people, and most people who are unhoused don't have behavioral health issues that cause them to fall into homelessness? It's other issues. It's job loss. It's housing scarcity. It's relational breakdowns and falling outs. So yeah, I think just laying out a book that included a mix of systems analysis as well as really the humanity of what's going on, so people hopefully feel like they can get more involved and engaged on the issue.
And definitely the issues that you talked about, the multitude of issues that can cause homelessness, they definitely start to cycle. Like once you fall into one, uh, don't know the exact statistics, but you are just more likely to fall into another and continue to fall down if you don't have the right support system. And this is something that you touched on as something called relational poverty. And so I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about what it is. I know you mentioned it a bit previously, and why does it matter as much as housing or income or having a job?
Well, let me ask you a question. So you're in high school right now? Are you a senior?
That's correct.
Junior? You're a senior. Are you planning to go off to college?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have an idea where you want to go or where you're going to go?
Uh, right now, I have no idea, to be
Okay.
honest.
So when you go to college, but you want to go to college, you're planning to go to college. Okay. So you go to college. What do you think? So, there's a lot of stuff you're going to learn in the classroom, right? What else do you think might be a benefit of going to college?
I mean, I get to make more friends and uh, both. I also get to like make friends with like any professors that I have as well.
Great answer. And how might that 10 years from now, after you finish your degree, maybe you do advanced degrees, graduate work, but let's just say after you finish undergrad, it's 10 years, you few years out of undergrad, how might those friendships serve you?
If I ever need, let's say, a job, or if I ever need someone to talk to, or if I ever just like want a friend to hang out with, I can like reach out to them.
Brilliant. And then what you just touched on is both a kind of um, resource of social capital applied to uh, career advancement, professional attainment. But you also mentioned kind of emotional value of resources of, gosh, I'm going through a tough time. I had a loved one that just passed away. I got injured and I have to, have a surgery. I need someone to talk to. I went through a tough breakup. You'd also think about your network and your relationships. My point in sharing that is like, this is something that's true for you. This is something that's true for me. This is everyone on earth. For people who are extremely poor, let alone people who are experiencing homelessness, but people who are living in poverty, barely getting by, those relationships or lack thereof can be the difference between life and death. So what the idea of relational poverty is that the the resources, the lack of social supports of relationship and the resources that are often embedded in those. So it's like an extreme version of a lack of social capital. And it's not just quantity of relationships. Many unhoused neighbors have relationships with other people who are unhoused or family members who might be not that much better off economically than they are. It's not to discount the value of those relationships, but it's to say, well, having access to people who have resources, who, whether it's financial resources or able to have the bandwidth to, emotionally support the person or both, that can make a huge difference in life. And so when people who are unhoused are surveyed, asked, what is the immediate cause of your homelessness? As many as 1 in 3 will cite some form of relational breakdown or brokenness as how they ended up on the streets or in a shelter. And that could be a divorce, a separation, could be an argument or falling out, it could be a death in the family, it could be, a whole host of issues, domestic violence, right? There's some situations where it's totally inappropriate to want to reconnect. It's not saying family reunification is the answer, but we really do rely on these ties. They're indispensable. And for folks who are on the streets or housing insecure, that can be the difference between falling into homelessness or maybe doubling up, tripling up, getting by for a little bit longer. And then the other piece of it, relational poverty as cause of homelessness, we talked about that. It's also a consequence of homelessness. If you're experiencing homelessness, may not have ready access to a shower. You may not, maybe you're working, but you're not sure where you're going to sleep at night. You're not able to, show up to civic groups or, church services as you want. Or if you do show up, you're showing up maybe as a person experiencing homelessness. You're not going to, have go to the barbecue or invite people to the barbecue afterwards, right? Just it affects things in different ways. And then, of course, the stigma around homelessness, so otherized, right? So what happens is you have this deepening of disconnection that can happen when a person experiences homelessness. That makes it all the more hard, not only to like form new relationships and make new friends or connections, but to even reconnect to your former network. Because often there's a lot of shame, or there's digital literacy barriers, or technical barriers. So yeah, relational poverty, I think, is an overlooked form of poverty that is consequential for experiencing homelessness. It's not the primary cause of homelessness. Housing cost and unavailability is the cause of homelessness. It's a housing problem. But because we're in the situation we're in, where there is such a housing shortage to meet current demand, there's all these other things happening, and people rely on their networks. So if those networks aren't existent, or they fall apart, or you have a falling out, it can be devastating.
And like you mentioned earlier, one of the stories in your book is someone saying, I never realized I was homeless when I lost my housing, only when I lost my family and friends. And that definitely, really strikes at the heart about what you were saying about relational poverty. And you go on to talk about, like you said, how you were then motivated to go and talk to Jeffrey and see if he had any family that he could reconnect with. In the book, you emphasize how walking by is a societal habit. It's something that we all do and it's inevitable. Why do you think so many people do it, and what do you think we can do to interrupt that behavior?
That's a hard question, my friend. Gosh, you're asking me the easy ones. Well, I don't know if I have a great answer for that. What I would say is there's a pretty famous study from Stanford University where they basically, I don't remember the entire setup, but it's basically like they were trying to determine if people at a department store chose to go through door one or door two, and behind one of the doors you could visibly see a Salvation Army bell ringer. Okay. So they're trying to decide, like, do people go out of their way to avoid the more accessible door because they don't want to talk to or see the bell ringer? Right. So that was there's probably some nuances, but that was the basic thing. And what they found in this study is, yeah, well, people go out of their freaking way to avoid that bell ringer. They'll walk further, go to the other door, choose the door without the bell ringer. But what would happen is when a bell ringer was like hidden behind both the doors, where, basically whatever door you go through, you're going to, see the bell ringer. They found that people generally interacted and gave money and, the whole thing. Right. And again, there's more nuance. Read the paper. It's been a while, but the basic takeaway, and why I'm sharing that for this, for your question, is what they found was that it's not so much that we don't care. It's not that we're not kind. It's not that we're not empathetic. It's that we are protective of our munificence. We are guarding our kindness, in part because we know if we get close enough, we're going to feel obligated to do something to help. Or we'll get close enough and find that we have our empathy activated, but there's nothing for us to do. We can't help. And that's a horrible feeling. So at a very like neurological, neuroscience type level, I think people make these decisions and behave in this way, not because they don't care. It's just because we're protective of being burned. We, come up, we don't know who the person is, what their backstory is. If we get close enough and we build a relationship and they're a person we want to connect with, can we end their homelessness? Right. And then that's hard to see the person. So um if you haven't noticed, consider myself a pragmatic idealist. Change can happen gradually and incrementally, but I generally believe you got to work towards that long arc of history bending towards justice. And there's an optimism in kind of what I'm saying. It's like people, yeah, I love people. I think people generally want to help out and just don't know how, don't know where to start, don't know what to say, you know? So, yeah, I think part of my work at Miracle Messages as an author, as a speaker, and just someone who has dedicated the last decade of their life to understanding and tackling homelessness. It's to create opportunities for people to engage around this issue, um, and hopefully inspire them to do things in their communities that need done.
That's a very interesting study that you brought up out of
Isn't
Stanford.
that
I
interesting? Right?
will, yeah, I will definitely
Yeah. Take a
take a
look
look at.
at it. Yeah, it's people, the powers that be right now more than any time in my lifetime feel like they are trying to divide us as people, make us feel like you have nothing in common. The person not across the street than across the country. And I think that's just total bullshit. In my experience, we have so much more in common that unites us as the human experience, even as a country. Uh, but it's a hard moment. It's painful because it doesn't always seem that way. And so I think it's critical to do work and do not only what work you're done, but how you're doing work that invites a broad base of people in to feel like their values, their faith traditions, their moral compass, their just desire to be a decent person can be applied. And then you create spaces for people to realize, well, I have more in common not only with that unhoused neighbor than I thought I did, but maybe that other volunteer who has a totally different backstory on why they're volunteering than I do. So there is a, kind of MLK beloved community um, goal that I feel in this work that I certainly keep top of mind.
And in your book, you talk about this idea of forgotten humanity. I was wondering if you could share a story from the book or just from your experience in general that illustrates this idea that's mentioned.
Gosh, where to begin on that? I mean, that's like a third of the book right there, right? So how do I summarize a third of the book? Well, the forgotten humanity. So, the way it's organized, there's the systems. What's it called? Failed systems or broken systems? I don't remember the exact subtitle, but so that's like housing, income inequality, work wages and wealth, foster care, right? These are like what we think of as like the policy choices, the government programs and systems that lead to homelessness. The forgotten humanity piece that's connects to like relational poverty, stigma, shame, stereotypes, exclusion, right? Where a lot of cities make it illegal to be homeless. No loitering, no camping, no sleeping, no feeding, no defecating or urinating. We don't want people doing that on the streets. I don't want that. But are you providing bathroom access? Right? If not, they got to go if they're on the street somewhere. Right? It's not a good situation for them. I don't want to poop in the street. Um, so exclusion, individualism, where we have these myths in America that it's like the pull yourself up by the bootstraps, individual success story. But the truth is like none of us can get through life alone. We all rely on each other. We all, to use the Bill Withers song lyric, we all need somebody to lean on, right? And then there's like a paternalism too that also is part of the forgotten humanity, where we feel like we know better than the person, or that they must have done something wrong. Otherwise, why would they be homeless? Right. Versus like, it's my friend Greg Colburn, who wrote a terrific book, Homelessness is a Housing Problem. He uses this metaphor. He talks about uh, thinking of it like a game of musical chairs. And the music stops, there's one less chair, someone's not going to have a seat. And that person who may not have a seat is probably the person who, broke their leg last week and is on crutches, right? Or has some kind of challenging factor. Now, did they choose to not have a seat? Was that make it, they had a bad lifestyle. No, it's like there's just not enough seats for everyone in that arrangement. And then they take another seat away and another seat, right? That's the situation we're in. But we don't often look at it like that. We think are left to assume individual deservedness and responsibility notions because we don't have stories of that's part of like our mythology in the country. So, um, a specific example, the forgotten humanity. Uh, Arnold Abbott was a 90-something-year-old World War II veteran in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And because of his faith practices and his values, he'd go out to, I think, Pompano Beach in Florida, giving out food to people experiencing homelessness. And one day, after some legislation had been passed, ordinances that made it illegal to feed people experiencing homelessness for fears of food safety, contamination, liability, bullshit. He got arrested. Got arrested by the police. This 90-year-old white dude, World War II veteran, handcuffed and taken away in a squad car because he was feeding people experiencing homelessness. That's ridiculous. I mean, that's, I realize that's like an upsetting and maybe a, memorable example. That's more or less the posture we have around homelessness. It defaults to criminalization and a lack of common sense versus, and a counter way to think about that. Maybe just the one other piece I'll bring up. God forbid, right now, there's an earthquake or a wildfire or flood. And suddenly a bunch of people who weren't homeless have lost their home, right? They are now survivors of this flood. Everyone survives. They go to, probably the local high school gymnasium. There's cots set up. It's kind of a triage center. The newspapers are running front page articles. How can you give to the relief efforts? People online are posting, hashtag whatever the town is strong, right? Sausalito strong, Madison strong, like, whatever, LA strong. And it's a time where no one's like, oh gosh, did you have flood insurance? Or did you, oh, there was a warning on the radio. Why didn't you evacuate? Right? And no one says that. And they're just like, oh my God, like, but for the grace of God go I. I could have lost my home. That could have been me. And it wasn't. So now I'm going to do what I can to help. Homelessness is much more equivalent to a disaster, akin to a flood, earthquake, or a fire. We just don't see it that way. We don't see the smoke. We don't see the embers. We don't see the floodwaters. We see the survivor. And without seeing the rest of it, we're left to assume, well, what did you do wrong? Did you deserve it? What were your choices? What's your behaviors like that led to this situation? Is very little to do with it. So yeah, hopefully that's clarifying what I mean by like that forgotten humanity, using an example where we remember our humanity, which is like a post-disaster therapeutic community experience. It's short-lived, but it's an example where we remember our humanity and we act likewise. So
And fortunately enough, we have people in this world and in this country as well who are able to see the big picture, to see both the survivor but also the embers and the whole flame, so to speak. And you also have an upcoming release of a kind of another version of When We Walk By. It's called the Workbook, coming out next May, which is
no,
uh,
next September. The
next
dates
September.
were online. It's not your fault. Yeah, it's September 8th, 2026, whatever the first or the second Tuesday is in September.
From the research that I've done, it's a 30-day guide for individuals, schools, book clubs, compiled of stories from people who have done work in this, in homelessness and in this homeless advocacy space. And so, can you give us a bit of a sneak peek of the kind of stories that we're going to be seeing, and what inspired you to create this sort of companion?
Yeah, it's a great question. Let's see. Well, yeah, the it's 30-day workbook. I see my wife sometimes. Well, I see her often, but I see her occasionally. You working on like 30-day couples journal, activities, or 30 days deep in your faith, right? And then, so there's like a format out there, 30-day guides to do whatever. I just kind of was thinking, gosh, it might be helpful to have something like that to go deeper on these issues in the book. Right. And, before people are like, oh, that sounds boring, right? Like, gosh, I'd rather do a couples journal. What's really exciting about it is there's two or three questions that lead with each day. And it's organized structurally the same as the book. So if you have read the book or you pick up the book alongside it, chapter one is around relational poverty. There's a couple days on that. And then it's stigma, shame, and stereotypes. And then it kind of flows from there. And then there's two or three reflection questions for the reader to work through. So, I don't remember any of them off the top of my head, but if you suddenly lost your home, who would you call? And how would you go about that? Or, when was the last time you had this conversation? It's not meant to make people feel bad. It's just kind of like reflect on hypotheticals, reflect on information, data. So you got some journaling space. And then I don't want to give away the whole thing, but there's going to be quite a few components that follow that both kind of provide some of the bite-sized information, key details from the book. But what's really exciting is we've had a couple people who have extensive lived experience of homelessness weigh in, not only on the questions, but they've responded to the questions. So you get to see their reflections and thoughts on the questions. And then there's stories, both of people experiencing homelessness who relate to those topics and those questions, but also housed people, volunteers, advocates on actions that people have taken around those topics and those questions and what the results been. So it should be a really engaging read. It'll, come out next year. So yeah, I hope people. I think you can even pre-order it online now, but we'll do a whole promotional thing sometime next year.
And I definitely encourage anyone who's watching this to buy it. I definitely will be. And as a last and closing question, I want to ask you if readers were to take one core lesson away from When We Walk By and the upcoming workbook as well, what do you hope it would be? And what's the first step you'd suggest they take to act?
The main thing is just, none of us can do this alone. I mean, even with the workbook, want people to buy the workbook, great, thanks. We'll get a like couple pennies of royalty from that. Like, it's not a super lucrative thing, but the real thing that excites me about the workbook, like, oh, it could be used in a classroom or a book club or, a faith group, and you're working through it with a few other friends or classmates or neighbors. My point in bringing that up, whether it's the workbook or otherwise, it's just like, the world can feel pretty shitty right now. Feel, what do you do? It's so messy and everyone's on their phone and uh, things are going the wrong way. And I'm not even getting into politics, but it's just like, it can feel, it's very easy to feel disempowered, very easy to feel cynical. So my hope is by not only engaging in these topics, but engaging with other people around these topics, it's such a good opportunity to reconnect as people and feel empowered. Feel be reminded of our own personal efficacy, that we can actually make a difference. So yeah, I think whatever your issue is, homelessness never was I thought of as my issue. It kind of stumbled into it. But it's not so much homelessness that has kept me here. I care about the issue itself, but it's really my values and my belief that everyone is invaluable and everyone is interconnected. We just don't see people experiencing homelessness that way. So I hope that your listeners and people who read my book or engage with miracle messages or visit my website or connect on social media, whatever it is, I hope that uh, you know, people will take the time to just realize that they're not alone and that there's so much more that they can do, especially when they connect up with other people. So.
the importance of a support system. That is definitely one big takeaway from this podcast.
Theme. It's a theme.
Thank you so much for being on here with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your experience and your time.
My pleasure.